The following audio is via a Skype call.
Welcome to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and guests unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build the collective experiences in our unconsciousness. Get ready to find your free will from your roots in the stars.
Once again, Sue Rose Minahan on Talk Cosmos, and today is September 15th, 2018, and it'll be our last week that we're focused on Virgo, that archetype. That's the sixth house, just the last house below the horizon. In fact, we've had 3 other talks last week. We were focused on a Virgan idea of healing the body and fractures, the fractured between body and mind with John Talevich from Sierra Madre. And September 1st, we worked on the idea of discernment, filtration, extraction, assimilation with Sarah Stromley, a cranial sacral therapist and astrologer here in Seattle. And initiating Virgo, and this gives a dimension of what archetypes are. There's these facets. They all have a thread, but there is, after a while, various focuses. And that was pets and how they give service daily of unconditional love. And that was with Marilyn Milano, who actually hosts her own radio show on 1150 KKNW, based out of Seattle, Washington, such as this show, which can always be listened if you're not in Seattle. Online, they have a listen button, or their handy-dandy app, KKNW AM, because it's an AM radio station. So Virgo also involves our analytical mental capacities. And it's mental because Mercury rules it, and the emphasis is finding that practicality. Virgo is an earth sign, wants to be practical. However, it is flexible. It's a mutable sign. And in the best nature, I might consider that's because mutability helps us to serve. Service is such a big feature of Virgo, and it remains a function, finding that alignment that between that perfect self of ours that Virgo is working to achieve, connected with that higher consciousness of the collective source, of looking at the polarity, which is Pisces, because really essentially of the 12 zodiac signs, there's essentially 6 axes. It involves the dimension of the opposite sign. So in this process of analysis, I might say, saying it correctly, critiquing myself, which is exactly what it does. It critiques the imperfections of anything, a word, self, etc. And why? So that we can be efficient. Because if something is efficient, it operates. And that serves, again, the entire part. And we are really preparing for that next leap, which will be next week into Libra. But Virgo works on that too. So these archives can be listened on the past episode link, which is through Talk Cosmos if you Google that. But today's discussion involves asking the possibility of what seeds do we grow? Because one area we have not really covered at huge length is plants. The very fact of that it is fertility. There's along with other signs, but it's not just fertility. In fact, my wonderful guest today will talk a great deal about plants and our full harvest and how we nourish those seeds, because today's topic is Botanical Alchemy seed harvest. And Paetra, Tauchert, has spoken on this program before early in Taurus. And Paetra is a consulting astrologer, a master gardener, horticulturist, and herbalist. She teaches botanical illustration at Occidental, California, California. And she's also hosting a wonderful, relatively new radio station that's every even Monday on the station KOWS, which is an FM station, unlike AM, which most people realize is both. And the name of that show is Astroscape. It's an astrological musicology show, which sounds like so much fun. It involves the astro weather, explores music made by artists born under the current astrological configuration. So it, once again, is showing this, well, in my terms, archetypal expression. And it's so important to really get an understanding of all this. Well, Paetra also has them archived, and you can find that through the SoundCloud Astroscape. Paetra also writes a full and new moon newsletter on her site, Paetra Tauchert, astrology.com. Hello, hello, hello again, Paetra.
Hi, Sue. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can. Beautifully.
Oh, good.
No, there's no
Yay.
echo. We're right
Sorted that out.
Yes, you did. Well, you have many hats. And again, I was looking forward to this talk a great deal. The fact of I've seen so many beautiful pictures of your garden, and the garden and the seeds all strongly relate to the entire mythology of Ceres, and who lost her daughter Persephone, and there was no growth on the planet. And so ultimately is that area wherever she sits in our horoscope where we nourish ourselves. And but plants, let's see if I should ask you a question or perhaps just let you lead on. You have fertile mind, I know, in regards to how plants really help us heal in every dimension.
Well, thinking of Virgo as an earth sign and looking at the whole wheel of the year and looking at the other two earth signs, with Capricorn, we're deep in the roots. It's the winter time in the northern hemisphere, and everything is sleeping, but there's a lot going on underneath the ground. And then we move a third of the year to Taurus, and that's when the spring begins again in the northern hemisphere. And there's so much, the Aries is when everything bursts, but Taurus is when we start to nourish and nurture the seeds that we're planting. And without that, super focused, fertile care of Taurus, we wouldn't get very far. Anybody who's ever done any gardening, any seed starting knows that there are no guarantees. Just because your little seed cracks its shell doesn't mean you're going to go the distance.
True.
So we can thank Taurus for that. And then we move along, and just before Virgo, we have Leo, which is like the rising up of the harvest, like the prominence of all the creativity coming into being and that celebration. And then we have Virgo, which is like, okay, like it's time to think about the party's over. Mm-hmm. We need to focus on the winter. Winter is coming. Virgos would be Starks in the Game of Thrones mythology. So with Virgo, there's still a lot of, the oldest associations for Virgo were fruitfulness and fertility. And the earliest names for Virgo meant both furrow and vulva, implying that, Virgo's the great cosmic goddess. She is the original earth goddess. So by growing things, there's a whole like fertile, carnal, sexual, productive, reproductive exchange that's happening. And with Virgo, we end up with harvesting the seeds ultimately. And it's such an important job because, again, like with Taurus, if you drop the ball, the same with Virgo. Virgo's in charge of really evaluating what is the very best seed, and we must save that to plant again when the wheel turns and we come around to springtime again. But we also need to eat. Like, we've grown this food to sustain ourselves through the rest of the year. So that's a very serious decision. And there's so much emphasis placed on Virgos, like anal uptightness around things being perfect. And if you go back far enough, that's where it comes from. It's a very serious life or death matter that Virgo is entrusted with, of that evaluation. And Virgo's associated with the Demeter and Persephone myth. So we have both the mother and the daughter. You have the harvest and the seed. And that's the base of the mysteries of life. And then, I know you've already talked a lot about Virgo, but I just wanted to put a couple of...
It always incorporates. And also, I might just state that Ceres and Demetra for the audience.
Thank you.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, because Demetra is the the Roman.
The Roman
yes,
version,
and then
yeah.
Ceres is the Greek. So yes,
Yeah.
at least, yes.
Well, and Virgo is an archetype that encompasses both virginity and sexuality. And if you go back to the original meaning of the word virgin, it wasn't somebody who was celibate, who didn't
No,
have sex.
that's
It
right.
was a woman who belonged to no man and who was really rooted in herself. And she could choose to engage in relationships and sex, but she remained sovereign.
Yeah, she never was property. That's so
Yeah,
you're
which
right.
is, like these days we are lucky enough to take that sort of thing for granted, but that has not been the case through history. So, there was a time where Virgo held a really significant and unique role in what women were up to.
Well, there is, and with Vesta, the hearth, also
Mhm.
I think a Virgonian goddess, and so it is getting to those. I want to say roots, but I love the way that you say it was rooted, but really to the fundamental concept of Virgo as etymology. Virgin meant differently. It wasn't
Yeah.
the sexuality that although sexuality and fertility are hand in hand in some ways. So we
Very
look
much
at that
so.
liberally, and it connects and reconnects, and in different dimensions all through the zodiac.
Well, actually, on that Vestal Virgin note, I wanted to read a passage from a really great book called The Knot of Time by Lindsay River and Sally Gillespie. I've always loved this book. It seems that even the famous Vestal Virgins of Rome, set apart to tend the sacred fires of Vesta, were not originally celibate. It was in the last years of the age of Aries, however, up to the 1st century BCE, that an apparently new concept of virgin sanctity was developing. Sacred celibacy rather than sacred sexuality became the official religious view in most cultures. In the Christian world, the Virgin Mary became the pattern for all women, whether nuns or mothers. But within this ideal of sexual abstinence, the ancient idea of the virgin goddess lived on. The Virgin Mary became the Queen of Heaven, inheritor of the symbols and titles of the goddesses she supplanted. Sometimes the goddess religion continued underground. In France, churches and cathedrals were built in formation with each other so that their placement on a map marked out the constellation of Virgo, a tribute to the Virgin Mother. The Virgo chapels, churches, and cathedrals were centers for many cults and long-standing religious traditions. The Romani people visited them to worship Sara Kali, the Black Virgin, and source of the spring of life that flows over the gypsy race. So, that just kind of denotes the sea change that happened at some point. But Virgo still, to this day, archetypes are massive. They contain the living energy of life that's imprinted through humans living, across millennia.
The Greeks, and about that time, I think it was the age of Aquarius. I'm just trying to remember all the ages as they are, because the ages here are like 2,000 years we're just passing. Pisces going into Aquarius at some point. But really, with the Greeks, again and again, whether it's Edith Hamilton, who writes a lot about mythology, or various people that speak of mythology, Lynn Bell for one, and I just heard Tarnas today here in Seattle at Washington State Astrology Association, because he's going to he wrote the book Psyche and Cosmos. Cosmos and Psyche. Is it Psyche and Cosmos? That's it. Psyche
Cosmos and Psyche, I believe.
Okay.
Thank you. It contains both of them. That's what's in the book.
And they're very related. And then there's going to be the movie Changing of the Gods, which he explained will not be an hour and a half. It'll be a series of 10 episodes. Maybe.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah, it really is. I can hardly wait. It's like a banner for astrology and just the whole archetypal thinking. So back to this is that the split that you're referring to really was this consciousness where Greece came during that period, wanted to remove themselves from nature in this effort of civilness. And so we have, the more I think about it, others have spoken, there's this split essentially between representing like in Mary, who didn't have a husband as far as some religions go along with, and different concepts of different ways of interpreting this spiritually based essence that people are always trying to connect with on some terms. But it's very true here. In other words, the Virgins is a great example where instead of, as you well put, between sacred celibacy or sacred sexuality, which of course involves the body. And if we split ourselves from body, mind, which is Virgo, from spirit, which is opposite Pisces, then there's this dilemma.
Well, and it's this, like you said, we're closing up the age of Pisces, and because they move backwards, we're moving towards the age of Aquarius, but we've been in the age of Pisces for about 2,000 years, and that is the dominant monotheistic story of that heaven is elsewhere. It's away from this earth, and this earth represents sin and represents trouble. So you just best transcend this, which extends itself into who cares what happens here? The environment's not that important because the afterlife is out there. So that is something that needs to be healed still, because God's everywhere. God's in everything.
Absolutely. It's that ethos that is manifested, and they're learning with quantum physics, with vibrational, mathematical energy that's beginning to blend science to astrology again, thankfully.
Yeah.
So many focuses. So, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, in a garden, or unless you had another thought,
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so focused on your garden. And not just the garden, but the garden represents, there's so many plants, and they represent so many wonderful medicinal features. In fact, I was looking up the properties of anemone, which actually relates to a story about Venus, which I may do for Libra next time. But I was astounded that the flowers, with federal, in other words, when people send flowers, and there's this various companies that send flowers, Ph.D. is one of them. They have online the descriptions of what the meanings of flowers means. Which means,
like the old Victorian meaning of the language of flowers?
Or ancient, before Victorian, way back.
Wow.
Yeah, Babylonian perhaps. And so in other words, I started researching this whole idea. It went back to Venus and Adonis and stories. And I thought, isn't that fascinating that flowers are a messenger, you might say, of this ancient mythology and ancient thought.
Yeah, and it's so amazing that we can continue to grow. Like if you're growing heirloom species, that means specifically that you're growing something that has been handed down lovingly and protected and kept intact. It hasn't been genetically modified, or, there's natural hybridization that takes place. Like that's one of the ways that we get new plants is identifying something. It's called a sport. If you look at a plant and all of a sudden it's doing something strange, or you grow a bunch of plants from seed and there's some that have different patterns, you isolate those out. And that's how we do the natural hybridization versus, it's one of the ways, versus this whole genetically modified monstrosity concept that we're dealing with, at this point. But yes, I mean, a garden in essence is so Virgo because, Pisces is nature. Pisces is everything. It's just everything growing together. But if you start to take all the pieces apart, which is what Virgo's job is in the world, to like isolate each thing and figure out like how they work together and make a whole system, that's incredibly Virgo. And also Virgo, I mean, I have 4 planets in Virgo, and I'm a pretty dyed-in-the-wool gardener. Like it's always just been something I've oriented towards. And when you think about Virgo, partly in terms of, again, if you look at the Pisces polarity where we have the archetype of untouched nature, and then we have a Virgo whose job is to meet God and nature halfway, it makes a lot of sense that a garden would be a place to apply that. It's instinctive for a Virgo to insert themselves into the design of something and to be a designer, and ultimately, like if you grow a garden, that in the beginning you plant things and foster them and it's exciting, but then by about like mid-season, you're a referee and an editor, because if everything just grows, if it's all like Pisces craziness, then it's beautiful in its own way, but things don't thrive. Like a real garden, when you really see a garden that is really thriving, you know that there is either a Virgo or somebody with a very strong Virgo archetype who's passionately driven to help maintain the balance so that all the different species get expressed and, represented and protected from getting like flattened by something else or from the rest of nature. Like I'm in Sonoma County and we have some serious gophers, and this place was settled by the Russians back in the day, and they fled because they couldn't deal with the gophers. And Russians are tough.
Oh, I'm amazed. I am amazed. I've had gophers. I think I poured beer down there. That was one of the things. I finally put garlic down, and I think that did work.
Gosh, it's been, it's an ongoing work in progress. I plant everything in baskets at this point, but I've also been tending this particular garden for 13 years, and baskets do rot out eventually.
Oh, yes.
And so if gophers suddenly explore areas they haven't been in, Neptune strikes again.
Yeah. Well, plants need space, and I'm thinking about that organizational ability and the weeding and the tending, the daily, just poking around. I remember in Hawaii, coffee can be grown, and at one time we looked at maybe a little plot to buy, but when I looked into the care of it, it's really a tender loving care. Every day you're there picking a few of the berries and another few of the berries, and you're weeding. But that's really the beauty of that existence, being attached to nature, functioning within it. So
well, and it also really shows that Virgo self-care, like it's the daily tasks that make up our lives that contribute to health. And indeed, there are daily tasks, a bare minimum of tasks if you just want your garden to continue to be okay. And if you really want it to shine, there's a lot of tasks depending on what the season is. And that's so Virgo, just little tasks, for like to be alone most of the time in the garden with maybe a pet, like a cat or a small dog, and editing and caring for things. It's about as Virgo as it gets.
Oh boy. Well, we do have time. George Washington Carver would go out to the garden. I have a tiny little book about the man who spoke to flowers, and he would talk to his flowers every day. So really there is the diva. I think we were talking about that, the subtle energies such as Finhorn over there in Scotland that was back in the 70s or late 60s, the garden. And this idea that that's where community begins is in the garden.
Well, it's true. I mean, and every plant species does have a Davic correlate that can be communicated with if you are able to or are so inclined. And another person that I would put on that list that you just referenced is Luther Burbank, who is from where I'm from here, Sonoma County. And he was a Pisces, but he was famous for communicating with the divas of the plants and convincing them to express themselves in different ways. For example, a thornless blackberry, there's a spineless cactus, and a bunch of other things. Like he created the russet potato, he created the Santa Rosa plum, he created the Shasta daisy. So, and in communication, and this was like back in the 1800s, earlier 1800s, and he wasn't coming from a woo-woo place. I mean, he was really kind of an uptight, weird dude in a lot of ways, but he was, spectacular successes were coming out of his gardens here. Things that still, like the russet potato is what most of the French fries are made of in this country.
Paetra, I love this. I used to work down in Burbank. I lived in Santa Paula.
Oh, yeah.
So it's
Definitely
like,
named for
yes,
him.
that name. That's really astounding. That states so much. And, I think California is a Virgo state, isn't it?
Oh, I don't know. I've never checked. That would be fun to know.
Yeah, I think the first astrology reading I had back when I was 20, he told me that California is a Virgo state. I was born down there, so. So it would be.
I mean, it makes sense because it's, very concerned with health in many ways, like more so than a lot of places in this particular country. So it seems like it would be Virgo.
Yeah. And for them to glorify, you might say, by naming such a city. I mean, whenever they named it, perhaps it wasn't quite as associated, but still, it's like how many people would recognize. Of course, he was very successful. I mean,
He was a big deal. I just recently saw an old photo that I'd never seen before of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera visiting Luther Burbank's garden here. He was actually already dead, and they were visiting his widow. But, like those guys came here to visit him.
Amazing.
I was delighted by that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. We will take a little announcement break, and we will open up our station here for calls. And if anybody there, you wonderful audience, would like to call Paetra or myself and ask any question, dial this number, 425-373-5527. We'll be back soon. While we take a break from this week's edition of Talk Cosmos, let's take a look at this cycle's archetype. We are currently in the yin period of Virgo. By leaving a cycle based on the creative manifested legacy of our highest creative form, the energy of Virgo completes the last sign below the horizon of the self and requires discernment to perfect oneself through the mental process of critical analysis. As a mutable earth sign duly ruled by Mercury, Virgo refines, heals, or fixes through daily routines, developing skills and services to control nature's chaos and maximize efficiency.
This is Sarah Stromley at Brain Body Therapy, and you're listening to Talk Cosmos on Alternative Talk, 1150 a.m., where we unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build on the collective experience.
Hi, returning again, Talk Cosmos, Sue Rose Minahan with Paetra Tauchert in California, talking about Virgo and the Botanical Alchemy seed harvest. So if you do have a call, this is the phone number. Ring 425-373-5527, and we'll be glad to take any questions or comments and add to the discussion. Yeah, Paetra, the medicinal qualities of plants, and you do botanical illustrations. So I'm interested, thinking that people that want to learn botanical illustration, there's so many ways of what am I trying to say? Benefiting from such an experience. I mean, just meditating on a flower through drawing it is beautiful. So,
to be deeply absorbed in, because I'm obviously involved with plants across the board, in lots of different ways, but it's so pleasurable to spend even an hour or half a day, however long it ends up being, sinking into really looking at your specimen, like you'll never see it the same way again. And that alone, I mean, it's a meditative practice. There's color therapy in it. If it's scented, it's aromatherapy. It feels like a deeply connecting and healing experience just to draw the plant. You haven't even gone any farther than that yet. And there's so much more that you could do with the plant.
What a perfect well, not even an assignment, but a activity for an earth sign also. And I think of the color and the aroma. That is so true. So in other words, they're not dried. They could be live.
Yeah, we traditionally draw from live specimens, and depending on what you're drawing and how long your drawing is going to take to complete, you definitely may end up drawing from pictures, because sometimes you'll take a certain, like if you're drawing a penstemon, then you draw from that penstemon, you take a picture so you get the angles right, but then you keep bringing in other penstemons just to get the colors right.
Interesting. That's one of the plants that we're going to put in our garden up here in Seattle, because we're really trying to get drought resistance. Plants.
I know, it's changing up there. It's always been like the wet, lush place, and now you guys are having to do drought resistant too.
Well, that in part, plus the fact water in a city, costs so much. And so I live in a little cooperative, and so we share the expenses, and that's how.
That makes sense.
Yeah, the focus there. But plants are changing too, what with the environment, I would guess.
Well, they're very adaptable. I mean, an annual does its entire life cycle within 1 year. It starts from seed and it returns to seed. And reseeding annuals means that you have sort of a perennial experience with an annual plant, but perennials are rooted in one spot, so they're a little less mobile. But annuals, you will see them creep around places based on microclimates and what's available to them based on what they need. So you can imagine that globally they're doing the same thing. Like I've heard that with climate change, there is like the maple trees that make maple syrup in New England, like those are creeping upwards.
Yes. And that's the most interesting idea, is this forward migration of plants, and particularly trees. I was reading that months ago, so I don't remember all the details, but that there is, I don't know if it's 100 monkey syndrome, but in a sense is communication. Of course, you were speaking of that too.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We talked about that before.
Yeah, something. And then it goes really to the medicinal qualities, like mustard is so renowned for different properties, whether it's even pain, I think, topically. I don't
Right. Well, it's like cayenne in that way. Sometimes the spicy herbs can be used topically as analgesics. But, Virgo has such an inborn awareness of the mind-body connection, like more than any other sign, because it's an earth sign, thus it's in the body, but also it's a mercurial sign, so it's also very mental and cerebral. And that concept of food as medicine, like what we're eating is our very first line of sending us in balance or sending us further out of balance. And for Virgo, it's so natural to become an herbalist or something along those lines. Like I've worked in different alternative medicine realms for my entire adult life, and the amount of Virgos always is like comical.
It's true. I have Virgo rising, and I've worked in a, excuse me, health store for years, and I loved it. I learned so much about the salts, the homeopathic salts, and et cetera, all these concepts.
Well, Virgo likes to be, in terms of foods, nutrition, and diet, they like to be more educators. Like they want to empower people on these topics, how to care for themselves rather than being the doctor god. I think there's other archetypes that are more like, I'll save you. And Virgo's just like, here, learn this. Like when I studied Ayurveda, one of the things that was really incredible and the most empowering thing I've ever learned in alternative medicine, which should just be called medicine, the other kind of medicine should be called alternative medicine, but that's where we are, is that, I lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
Ayurveda.
Oh, that there's a cross. There's a hot, cold, wet, dry cross, and everybody has a unique constitution, and you're going to be somewhere on that constitutional cross. And so if you run hot and wet, you're going to want things that are cold and dry, whether it's food or drink or herbs, or even, everything lands somewhere, whether it's thoughts, a movie you're going to read, a book you're going to watch, a color you're going to paint your wall, everything's there. So that's this incredibly empowering way to look at life and understand that you can make decisions that will heal yourself in small ways and in big ways.
Very strong. That really is the personal action. The universe loves action. In other words, making a choice, getting off the fence or just stepping up. And that's a beautiful, good reminder. Because Virgo is the small step. It's every day. It's the daily routine. So in that case, it does make things bite-sized. You don't have to.
Exactly. It does. And ethnobotany is a field that analyzes, examines, celebrates the intersection between plants and people, which is massive. We would be naked, we would have no food, we would have no shelter, like we would have no medicine, like we really need plants. Like the fact that people can even be disconnected from plants in theory is kind of remarkable, because the reality is that nobody's disconnected from plants. But ethnobotany is studying that. So that's where the medicine is, like the places where you bring medicine in the widest sense of the word, So herbalism and flower essences and naturopathy and, any of those things, any way that you're applying herbs to the body and healing body and spirit, that's all the domain of Virgo.
It's such a building block that really mainstream in many ways, thankfully, what with the 60s and the Uranus Pluto square in Virgo really
Right.
helped to emphasize that so many ideas are now organic. Of course, when you think about it, everything originally was organic, but then we went through that tremendous insecticide and trying to, etc.
Which we haven't really recovered from. And I would underscore that
No.
California trying to be more of a Virgo by trend setting certain ways, of getting away from that. But yeah, I mean, that's another split between mind and body, is like this conceptual, like, oh, we must control nature and like kill the bugs. It's like, but wait, we're killing our gut,
Well,
we're killing ourselves, we're killing everything.
California, Nathan found out. Nathan is our board engineer here that is in the background, always keeping us happily on air. And he looked it up,
Nathan.
and California is a Virgo state and Scorpio moon.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Virgo Sun, Scorpio rising. I guess I'm perfectly placed here.
Yeah, I was thinking that. You are indeed. Yeah,
That's funny.
so there is that. Hopefully then California does have that magnificent sense of really looking at where the power and the powerlessness is. Of course, we're jumping into another archetype.
They all overlap.
But they do, especially, I think, as they begin to develop, they begin to interlock more substantially.
Well,
So-
and Virgo and Scorpio too both have that purification orientation,
Mhm.
deep healing and purification. So it's a good overlap.
Yeah, represented by intestinal, large and small, if nothing else. It's that
Exactly.
detoxification.
Another reason that gardening is so good for Virgos is, if we look at the axis of Virgo and Pisces again, is that Virgo can get a little too clean, a little too sterile, a little too perfect and organized. And that's, there's danger of life being extinguished through too severe of that sort of orientation. So we turn to the polarity point of Pisces and remember that Virgo needs dirt. Virgo needs to get dirty. It needs a little chaos, it needs a little dirt under the nails. And also that, the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi, where you can't don't make something too perfect. You want there to be a little bit of craziness, a little bit of chaos, a little bit of something that wasn't perfect, because that's how life is. And so that's a big piece for Virgo to embrace. So I feel like there's the Virgos that don't go outside, that are afraid of dirt because they're so in the cleaning mode. So it's like, Virgos, get out there, get into the dirt.
Excellent point. There's been a huge increase in allergies for the last, 20 years.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
it's in part because of people being removed from, just as you say, the soil. Because and then they don't have those antibiotics, or they don't have, I don't know if it'd be antibiotics or just the natural resistance that you build up because you have to build some strength up to fight it. Otherwise they overpower.
Right. I mean, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and we were eating dirt, I mean, I think it was a good idea, not too much, not all the time, but
No.
I think that there's just, we need to return to that, not, everyone get out there, eat dirt, but just that sense of being connected. I know sometimes when women are pregnant, they'll get those really intense cravings that tells them exactly what they need for their baby. And women will crave clay and dirt and rocks. They'll want to eat that.
Amazing. Well, well, that does remind me of a time that were these people, they did mud baths, you might say. But anyway, yes, mud is very medicinal. Mud
is very medicinal.
Amazing properties.
Mm-hmm. Another archetype that really works with Virgo is the medieval alchemist. There's two, actually, the medieval alchemist and the Benedictine monk. And the alchemists were dedicated to constantly trying to refine gold from lead. That was their main focus, and all the steps that you would go through. And ultimately, if you study alchemy at all, you understand that it was literally that, but it was also this metaphorical transformation of the soul.
Yes.
And so Virgos are always, the Virgo archetype is promoting, always trying to just improve and better things all the time.
And Mercury, Hermes, Mercury is the Roman and Hermes the Greek, and that archetype has, from ancients, before with Mesopotamia, very strong, not known as Hermes at that time necessarily. It was Ningishzida, which was an energy, a god energy at that time. But still, it is that transformational alchemy of going between crossing the boundaries. Mercury was of the twins, and
Right.
rules Gemini also, so that it
Mhm.
could go between, which is again life and death. It's that manifestation of the physical, and coming from the spiritual is the interchange, the unity. That, of course, Virgo, rather than gathering, like one of the features of Gemini, but it's discernment and organizing, such as we were describing in the garden.
Right. And distillation.
Yes. And
To take, like, I think a lot about that Virgo, Gemini, Mercurial thing, because Gemini is in charge of, like orienting self and learning the names and gathering. Like, you can't get enough information if you're in the Gemini mode. But when you get to Virgo, it's like, okay, now let's organize it so we can actually reference it and use it.
yes, make a pattern or lead on to other, make it efficient too, so that it has a usage. It's that earth sign. You want to be able to collect
Make it practical, the distilled practicality.
And I really like the idea that Virgo is mutable, because as an earth sign, which, like beautiful dirt that's just crumbles, it's so things can grow in it and water can pass through it. And it's a wonderful ability, but metaphorically, it also allows a person to make an idea that has form to it, but alter it if it doesn't work, perfect it.
It's true. I sometimes think of Virgo as sand too.
Yeah.
Because of the mutability of sand, where it's, you can have these incredible dunes, but then the wind comes and it's like, woo, changing.
That's an interesting image, because then it throws me over to Pisces, because I'm thinking of those little, like in Wizard of Oz, the little hourglass that goes upside down and has so much time. But that was one form of a clock, and I don't know if it relates exactly to Pisces of no time, but it's sort of
no, it's true. Well, kind of in a way, it's more the Gemini Neptune, the Gemini Pisces, because Pisces or Gemini is locating itself in a specific time and space, and then Neptune is the no time, no space. Everything is all the same. So the Mercurial umbrella for Virgo and Gemini meeting Neptune and Pisces.
And the chart today, this is for Seattle or Bellevue, and of course your chart would be perhaps down there in California, because you're north of San Francisco, or west.
Yep.
Or east.
I'm an hour and a half north of San Francisco, pretty much on the coast.
Ooh, sounds lovely.
It is.
Yes. But so Mercury is conjunct 7 degrees to the sun in Virgo, so it's definitely very analytical and thinking. Of course, this Mercury stays predominantly can easily be close to the sun, but it's nicely conjunct, because there's, without the combustion, I'm trying to remember how many degrees that is, about 4 or 5. I think mine's combust, but.
Well, and you think about that, the sun with Mercury in Virgo, as we're heading on towards Libra time, which means we're really descending into autumn. When we get to the end of Virgo, it is the equinox pass. And that mind with, Virgo needs to work all the time. It's always got to be working on something. So mind and body fused right there with the Virgo perception of, okay, we're going towards winter. And even if we're not, living as our ancestors did, there still is that sense of like, oh, winter's coming. What do I need to do to prepare for that? So I feel that's in this chart a lot.
The harvest, yes. That it is a very busy activity, and I'm thinking again back to Mercury that has the fleeting feet that travel, and it is still in opposition. Sort of a wide opposite. No, it's absolute.
Well, Mercury's pretty there still. The sun's moving on, but Mercury's there.
Yeah, opposing Neptune.
Yep.
In its own sign.
Right, which is right on the ascendant for me, which is why I lost my train of thought in the middle of a sentence, because I'm having a Neptune transit.
Well, I am it's transiting my Sun and Mercury, has been for a year. It is this year, and it will next year.
It's quite a transit. It's definitely magical, and it's definitely spacey.
Well, yes, you have to refocus to other daily activities. I think,
Mm-hmm.
again, gardening is beautiful. I'm thinking of the Virgonian attributes that connect one with nature because it does allow for that meditative quality, such as you were bringing out with the painting.
Well, it's funny. Virgo's like, it's the combination because I'll put many a long day in the garden, like all day long. And then at the very end, not only am I relaxing, I've tired myself out, which Virgo needs to do to not have the mind race so much. And then there's a meditative state that's entered. So it encompasses everything. It allows the doing and then it allows the reflection.
Medicinally, are there favorite? Well, aloe. I love aloe. Aloe,
It's a
aloe
good
is
one.
fabulous for taking care of burns.
And internally too, it's something that
Yes.
cools heat in the body, so you can drink it. You can put it on burns externally, and you can drink it regularly if you run hot.
Yeah. Trader Joe's sells a wonderful gallon or half
They
gallon.
do, I know, isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, I buy that regular. Add it
Yeah,
to a
I
little.
do too for like a decade.
Hmm. So there's so many plants that. Well, there's like echinacea, and although I don't know if people really use. I mean, if you grow echinacea, you have to be fairly educated, I think, to know how to use.
Well, actually, I am growing echinacea, and it's funny because it's a very potent herb, but it's also something that has really entered commercial nurseries as an ornamental because they've hybridized it a lot. There's lots of different versions and colors of echinacea now, so you could find it in somebody's garden, and they wouldn't necessarily know that it's the same thing as the herb because they'll just call it coneflower.
Oh, that reminds me back to when I was looking up the flower meanings and myrrh, because of the wise men with gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So I was wondering, what does myrrh mean? And that's gets very involved with a long mythology that I won't go into, but it is interesting that of those three iconic gifts that are brought up so often for many people, what they represent. And
Right. Well, and frankincense and myrrh are tree resins.
yes, the plants.
Yeah, like the blood of the trees, really.
Yeah, and myrrh really related to this story where it was about love, forsaken love, or in other words, to love now, least it leave you.
Uh-huh.
So
That's a take-home message from myrrh, people.
yeah. Myrrh more, myrrh more instead of more.
Love more, yeah.
Like that. Yeah, the astrology of cities and states, it's a fascinating thing. I don't know which other states are Virgo. California is, which one doesn't always think about because of Hollywood, which is so predominant. But there is that emphasis of food, back to the food basket with the nourishment of the harvest.
Well, I mean, even when you think about Hollywood, like if you're a famous person, you probably work pretty hard to look good all the time, and health and beauty are the same thing. So you are going to look a lot better if you're healthy. So even that ties in with Hollywood and Virgo.
That's true. And being fit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Virgo is very.
And it's a little bit the Virgo Pisces axis because of the glamour of Hollywood and all of that.
So it fits. Okay.
Yes, it does fit.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with this chart, going back to, I'm staring at it here, and sometimes
I have pulled it up too.
Yeah, and of course, it's a very mutable T-square, isn't it? With the moon, the moon's in Sag. Here we are expounding
sure
on
is.
belief systems and looking at them with nature. I mean, it's a beautiful day to be talking about this.
Yeah, it is.
So for folks there, it's like, here, I have it in the 10th house. Is it near the midheaven? Is it near the midheaven down in California?
Yeah, it's just a little shy. The midheaven's 19 Sag and the moon is like 6 degrees before it.
So, of course, food relates to the moon with the cycles, and that was the original calendar, really, for people.
True.
And with the thinking possibilities. And interestingly, 2 of those signs are in their own sign because Neptune is in Pisces, which will be for another 14 Let's see, it's in a sign for 14 years, so
It's going to be in Pisces until 2024.
Okay, so that's another 6 years.
That's a while.
It is. I'm rather glad myself.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. We'll finally get the message.
Yeah, I like it too.
And which goes back to your radio station, which is a wonderful blend of the information and also the music. College. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I'm having fun. I mean, it just kind of morphed into that. It didn't start that way. I did my first one and I put a couple of songs in, and then I realized I really liked picking the songs. And so next one I was like, maybe I'll like follow this inspiration. So I have, and it's continuing to evolve, but I'm enjoying myself with it.
Yeah, because life really, for astrologers, we can get caught up in our interpretations and how does it relate? But I'm realizing more and more with this show and the music, that's why I'm drawing this back in. But what with like last week, John Talevich, a chiropractic doctor and artist, so much of his healing work, and the cranial sacral therapist, Sarah Stromley. In fact, every Virgonian guest has strongly in their described or expressed, we might say, in their work, the archetype of Virgo, with Marilyn Milano as a pet, who operates with rescues and so many aspects of pets, and yourself with the garden and horticulture. And so, in other words, life is the Hermetic philosophy of as above, so below. There's various ways of saying that, but
that's a very succinct way that we can thank Hermes, who is Mercury, who rules Virgo.
Yes, and so all these expressions, such as your show too, with the music, and as we have with all our conversations, just keeps illustrating that astrology is reflecting that energy as above that we gather from this miraculous energies that helps guide, if we, through our free will, choose to. And the music is a great illustration of that.
Well, one of the things that I make something called astro books when I do people's charts, and I like to illustrate them. I do it with my blogs too, because I realize that although it seems like most people are curious about what astrology has to offer them, not everybody has an ability and interest and aptitude for the language. And so I like to give visuals, heavy visuals, to try and convey the feeling of the astro signature. And so that's why I got excited about the music, because it's another way to bridge from just the mind and the words and the concepts into something that you can experience.
Richard Tarnas today was again and again illustrating to listen to great music, read great literature, watch movies, and then look into the astrology of who wrote it or who acted it. And so often in the movies, how the people, which is research, which is back to the Virgo, investigating and getting information, and really clarifies the many interrelated people that would write a story, and then the actors. Like, for instance, there's one with Clint Eastwood in $1 Million Baby that is about Venus and Saturn. Well, I guess this has been a wonderful talk, Paetra. I most am thrilled. Next week, we'll sign off with Paetra in just a moment, but next week we have not Sarah Stromley, that was last week, Wendy Weirot. And Wendy has been on in June, and we're going to talk about the equinox and enter with Libra and mythology. She travels extensively to these wonderful sites and has followed it. And Paetra Tauchert, do listen to Astroscape on Mondays even. And what time is that, Paetra? I'll let you sign off.
It's from 11 a.m. to noon on the even Mondays of each month. But you can listen to it in archive form, because it's kind of a time that a lot of people aren't available to listen. So that's soundcloud.com/astroscape.
Otherwise, it's KOWS. Well, thank you to our wonderful audience, and we are so thrilled to connect, and we'll be back again next week.
I would love to close with this poem from Virgo poet Mary Oliver, who was born on September 10th, 1935. My work is loving the world. Here the sunflowers, there the hummingbird, equal seekers of sweetness. Here the quickening yeast, there the blue plums, here the clam deep in the speckled sand. Are my boots old? Is my coat torn? Am I no longer young and still not half perfect? Let me keep my mind on what matters, which is my work, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished. The phoebe, the delphinium, the sheep in the pasture, and the pasture itself, which is mostly rejoicing since all ingredients are here.
Yes. All right. See you again.
Thank you so much, Sue.
Thank you, Paetra.
Thank you for listening to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and guests unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build the collective experiences in our unconsciousness. Be sure to tune in next Saturday at 6 p.m. to continue finding your roots in the stars.
The preceding audio was via a Skype call.